Welcome to let me start again. Welcome to another episode of Candid Conversations. I'm your host, Charles Hsuan. Today we have Arthur Goldstuck. If you don't know who Arthur is, go Google because he's my first ever guest that has a wiki page. Welcome to the show, Arthur.
Thank you, Charles. Great to be here.
So, Arthur, I've interviewed over a few, 100 to 200 people by now, and you're the first guest that I can recall that actually has a wiki page. Were you surprised when that happened?
I was, but what surprised me even more was how much it got wrong.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I decided not to correct the errors because it will throw off anyone trying to commit identity theft on me. So I thought that's okay.
Okay. And anything that's wrong about it that you want to share?
Well, I won't tell you about the element that's wrong that I want to keep up there as wrong.
Okay.
But the books I've written, for example, it's out of date. In fact, I find a lot of talks that I give, when I get introduced, people are actually using my Wikipedia page. And I sit there thinking, that's like 3 years out of date or 5 years out of date, or whatever item they're talking about, because some gets updated, others don't. And for example, my Hitchhiker's Guide to AI is my 20th book. But every single talk I've given where they've used my Wikipedia page, they say, also of 19 books. And then I always say, and this is my 20th.
Okay. Well, actually, that's something I wanted to mention. I counted 21. So anyway, okay, look, you know it. So 20 books it is. 20 books it is. So the reason why we are here is because you're a fascinating character. The first time I heard of you was back in 2013. I worked in publishing. I worked for Entrepreneur Magazine back then. And I remember we got invited to an event by Standard Bank, and you were the keynote speaker there. And obviously, we're talking about some trends and forecasting and things. And your latest book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to AI, it's fascinating. I've read parts of it. I haven't read everything, just a disclaimer. And as mentioned, you've written 20 books. And just for fun, I wanted to find out, like, one of the earlier books, if I remember correctly, in 1990, was about the modern myth and urban legends in South Africa. So do you mind sharing one or two urban legends or myths that's still valid today that people, because I don't actually know. I've been living in South Africa for 30 years. I don't actually think I know any urban legends. So please do share.
Well, first I must mention that 5 of my books were on urban legends. So the very first one was The Rabbit in the Thorn Tree.
Yes.
In 1990, and that was my first book. So it has a very special place in my heart. And the title story, The Rabbit in the Thorn Tree, is still for me an iconic story of how urban legends happen. It's not believed today, but at the time it had a massive impact. And that was when FNB first emerged out of Barclays Bank. They were called Barclays Bank in South Africa. They changed their name to First National Bank, and they unveiled a new logo of an acacia tree against a setting sun, in other words, a thorn tree. But almost instantly, people started seeing shapes in that tree. And part of the backdrop of that is that FNB had just advanced a loan to a businessman to place an ad calling for the unbanning of the ANC. And the second last apartheid prime minister, P.W. Botha, in Parliament called the CEO of FNB an enemy of the state or something along those lines for funding an ad for the ANC. Of course, within a couple of years, that was seen as quite a ludicrous accusation. But at the time, FNB were almost tarred with a brush of being ANC supporters at a time when it was illegal. And especially for the white population, they saw this as the ANC bank. And when that logo was unveiled, they started seeing shapes in the logo that confirmed their suspicion the supposed suspicion. And amongst these shapes in the tree were a map of Africa and a rabbit. And why the rabbit was such a bizarre element of what people saw is that the police who used to go hunting for ANC members, called comrades in those days, used to use the phrase in Afrikaans, "We're going to catch rabbits." So ANC members became associated with rabbits. But bizarrely, the people who saw these shapes in the tree thought that by having a rabbit in the tree, it was a symbol of the ANC, despite the fact that it was the police who chose that as a derogatory symbol of the ANC. So the urban legend kind of disproved itself almost if you examined it critically for mere seconds. So the reality was that there was no reality to these.
Okay, do you mind sharing one more? This is fascinating. Like, I mean, because I'm just thinking about the F&B logo, and I've been with F&B for like more than a decade. I must say, look, I don't remember that logo per se. So do you mind sharing another story from one of the urban legends?
I'll share one of the more humorous legends,
Okay.
which is a story that did the round for many years until I wrote my second urban legends book, which was called The Leopard in the Luggage. And that was a story of someone who had found a leopard on their farm, and they phoned the wildlife authorities, and the authorities said to them, "This is what you should do. You should use a tranquilizer dart," which many farmers had in those days, and dart the leopard and put it in some kind of container and bring it through to us. So the guy promptly darted the leopard, and the only crate he could find was actually a suitcase, a large suitcase, and he managed to cram the leopard into this very large suitcase, put it on the back of his bakkie, and then drove off to find the wildlife authorities. And on the way, nature calls. So he stopped on the side of the road and went into the bushes. And while he was in the bushes, he heard a vehicle pull up near his car. So he finished what he was doing, ran out in time to see a minibus speeding away, and went to his bakkie, and there was no suitcase. And he thought, this spells trouble. And he began following the minibus. Next thing, it started veering across the road, the minibus that is, and came to a jarring halt, whereupon the inhabitant, the driver and the passengers of the car leaped out and began running, and coming out of the vehicle behind them very languidly, still drugged, was a leopard. So they had thought they were stealing some kind of valuable item in the suitcase. And in fact, it was a suitcase containing the leopard. So that inspired the title, The Leopard in the Luggage. And it's still one of my favorite stories to this day because of all the different elements that it symbolized back then. But once the book came out, of course, people stopped telling the story because it was so prominently debunked as an urban legend.
Ah, very cool, very cool. So I wanted to chat a little bit about your company. Like you started the Worldwide Works in 2000, and I remember 2000 that was like the whole .com thing. What was your main focal point when it comes to research, or back then? Do you remember the early 2000s?
Well, what had actually happened was after I wrote my first tech book, which was the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Internet back in 1995, because it was the only book of its kind in this market, by default, people saw me as the expert on the internet, and they began asking me for consulting services, which I actually didn't enjoy. But part of what I discovered through consulting was that you can't actually consult without having research at your fingertips. And there was no research on internet use in South Africa. So I decided to start conducting internet research. I formed a company called Media Africa with two partners, Kathy Stadler and Herman Manson. Herman still publishes a media toolbox to this day, a media newsletter. And it was quite cool because we never met Herman, but via the internet, we got to know him and got him to join our little operation. And we published the first research paper on the size of the internet user base in South Africa. Then there was a kind of period of listings frenzy of companies being listed on the JSE. And we were approached to be part of a consortium of companies that would come together and be listed as one entity on the stock exchange, which in retrospect was a massive mistake, but we thought this was so cool. We part of this whole .com explosion. As it happened, the consortium was quite large, comprising 10 companies, of which we were the smallest company, so we had the least say in its running. And it turned out to be a disastrous consortium. It never was able to leverage the strengths of its individual components. And again, because we were so small, we didn't have much say, and they didn't allow us to drive internet strategy, certainly. But what then happened was the CEO called me in one day and said, "This thing you're doing is passé." And I said, "What thing that I'm doing?" He said, "This internet thing." What he didn't realize was that this internet thing had become part of the fabric of everything that businesses were doing. And that's why you didn't actively go looking for this internet thing. The internet was just there as a platform for all communications and business processes. But the moment I heard that, I realized I had to get out of there. And within 2 weeks, I was out of there and I'd started Worldwide Works to continue pursuing my vision of internet research, or at least high-tech research, but also publishing. So part of Media Africa had been Gadget Magazine, and they didn't get Gadget Magazine either, so they let me take it with me when I left the group, and it became part of Worldwide Works. And Gadget has been running to this day, and in fact, in the last 5 years, we've revamped it, given it a new lease on life, got a team behind it, and it's proven to be an extremely influential online publication over these decades. But along with those two elements, the publishing and the research, I don't offer consulting as such, but I do a lot of presenting to corporate audiences. So public speaking, in effect, became the third leg of the business. And today, especially with AI, there's a huge demand for briefing executive committees, boards of companies, and also corporate events on where AI is going and how they need to respond to it. So through that process, professional speaking became a key element of what I do. I thoroughly enjoy it. And I became very involved in the Professional Speakers Association of Southern Africa. And I'm pleased to say that as of this month, I'll be president of the association for the next year.
Congratulations, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I believe the convention is actually happening tomorrow, 19th of April. And I wanted to, so let's talk about, because you said you get invited to speak a lot, and obviously that's actually where we met at the Heavy Shift event on AI. And you mentioned like your ex-boss kind of like thought this was like, this whole internet thing is just like a fad. So, which is exactly kind of like the next question I wanted to ask you. So I posted it on LinkedIn, I posted on my social media and also my WhatsApp group to say that, listen, I'm interviewing Arthur, the person that wrote the book about the internet, which is still one of the top selling books in South Africa about the internet, even though it's been so long. What questions do you have for Arthur? And I start seeing a pattern of the questions people ask. So and I have a sneaky suspicion those might be one of the 3 questions you get asked the most about AI. So let's start off with that. Like, what are the 3 questions that you get asked almost every single time at an event? The top 3.
The very first question is always, what is AI? And the problem with that question is it's so many things. It depends what perspective you're coming from that'll dictate what AI is to you. But essentially, it's machines being able to act in a way that they appear to have human intelligence, or in a way that previously would have been assumed to be only possible for humans to do. And that includes things like data analysis, in generative artificial intelligence that would be creating content from scratch, and the like. But there's numerous forms of AI. AI can, for example, be when you pull data from different sources and you ask an AI tool to correlate all of that data and find conclusions within that data. And that's far more advanced than just a machine appearing to act human. So there's a range of activities and a range of definitions for AI. So I actually don't like that question, but it does force me constantly to think about, what does AI mean to me now? How would I define it now as opposed to maybe 5 years ago or a year ago, for that matter? The second question that I get asked almost every time is, what gave you the idea for this book? And I find that a very strange question, because it's such an obvious book to write. If I wrote a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Internet 30 years ago, and I wrote a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to Going Mobile about 15 years ago, then it's blindingly obvious that I should write a book on AI in the same vein. So I'm happy to answer the question, and also what sparked the producing the book. But I always find it a strange question.
And the third one, and the third question?
There isn't a third one that is commonly asked, but there are a few that are kind of interrelated. For example, will AI take all our jobs?
Yes, and that was a trending question that I got the most. So go for it, take it away.
And then it depends on what sector you're in, what you do, what you're studying, whatever the case might be. Yeah, for some people, it will take their jobs. For others, it'll make them far better at their jobs. And the advice I always give people is to look at how AI can enhance you in your role, whatever your role is. Because if you don't embrace it and use it to make you better at what you do, then it will replace you. So that's the basic answer to that question. The related question is AI going to take over from humans? Will it destroy the human?
Like the Terminator, right? Again, those questions came up, And your answer to that is, maybe you are already a robot, Arthur. I don't know. This could be AI talking to me. Who knows?
I'm not admitting or denying anything.
So when I was reading your book, right, I first of all, I love the layout, like because I'm busy writing my own book, and I had a similar idea, which was with icons. Different icons mean different things. For example, there's a light bulb one, there's one for people that's more into tech. Because my wife actually gave me the idea, and when I saw your book, I said to my wife, "Did you mean like this?" She said, "Exactly." I'm like, "Okay, well, Arthur already did it, so that's cool." So I thought that was a nifty. So if I remember correctly, there were about 4 or 5 different categories, right? There was something for general knowing, something for technicalities. Can you just remind us what were some of those icons that you had?
Yeah, so there's a light bulb, which is for general interest for anyone to read. That's at the top of the pile. At the bottom of the pile is a gear, a symbol of a gear, which is for people with a technical bent. So that's technical content or technical interest. And in between, there's the house, which is consumer interest. There's a business chart, which is business interest. And then there's a certificate icon, and that's for professional interest. The thing with those, though, is something that's of consumer interest will also be of business interest, for example, and many consumers will be interested in elements of professional interest, especially if you're a student and you want to go in a certain direction. But even people who are not interested in a particular profession will be fascinated to see how it will affect them. So, for example, there's a chapter called The AI Will See You Now, which is about how AI will change medicine and healthcare. And that is geared towards a medical professional, but it'll be of tremendous interest to any consumer who obviously is concerned about how AI can enhance their medical treatment, diagnostics, etc.
Speaking about that, one of the questions I got from someone is, are there any companies in South Africa that are using AI and you thought that, wow, that's a different take on it? Is there any case study that stood out? And then the follow-up question is, how are we doing when it comes to benchmark with the way we're embracing AI compared to global?
It's a fascinating question because so much is being done with AI in South Africa. And I give many examples in my book, but in my talks also, I take people through some of the local examples. My favorite is a company called Aerobotics, which uses drones and high definition video to film and analyze crops and trees in orchards. And using AI, they're able to analyze the health of the crops, moisture content in the soil, pests that are damaging the crops, etc., and then provide guidance to farmers on how to address the issues that it has found in those systems. So they are a world leader in that field. And the irony is I found out about them because I went to a conference in the United States about 10 years ago, where one of the case studies that was being demonstrated was a California company doing something similar and starting to provide their services in various African countries. So when I came back, I wanted to see whether this was being used in South Africa and discovered that there's a company doing just that, but far more than just that in South Africa, and that was Aerobotics. So that's one of my favorite examples. But you can look at almost any bank or insurance company and you'll find that they're using AI at some level or another. There's a tool from Amazon Web Services called SageMaker, which is a tool for building machine learning applications very quickly. And that is being used to build tools for risk management and fraud detection in banks. And South African banks were among the first in the world to use those kinds of tools. And we're talking now 2017, 2018. SageMaker was launched end of 2017. And in 2018, it was starting to be used by South African banks. Then also in 2018, I think it was, Naked Insurance emerged in South Africa, the first AI-driven insurance company for short-term insurance, where you onboarded your insured product using automated processes, using AI. You would process a claim using AI, and then you would be paid out based on AI analysis of your claim. And that's already a 5-year-old process or case study. So you can imagine that was happening in 2018 already. How much more is happening today in South African businesses? And a lot of South African startups also coming up with new AI applications.
All right, so Arthur, you were talking about Naked Insurance, and I must say I signed up with Naked and back in 2020, and I experienced that AI straight away, like how intuitive it is. The ladies called inverted commas Rose, and it was pretty amazing, like how smooth it is. So yeah, those are great examples. Thank you so much for mentioning them. Now, another question that I got from people is, a lot of us use ChatGPT, me included. And so the question is, how can we verify the information given by ChatGPT? Like, are there any rules of thumb that we can see, like that we can use?
There's a very simple principle with any information that a generative AI gives you, or any piece of writing that it presents to you based on your prompt. Any fact contained in content that's generated by AI must be double-checked independently from the AI. So if it says, for example, that this phone I'm reviewing has a 110 megapixel lens, then I better go and check either on the manufacturer's website or on something like GSM Arena, which has the specs of every single phone ever made. Go double check in GSM Arena, does the phone have a 110 megapixel lens? And invariably, it's made things up. And I remember when ChatGPT first came out and I wanted to test it. It was at the time that the Samsung S23 was about to be launched, I think it was. So end of 2022, the S23 was set to be launched in January 2023. So I asked it to give me a review of the S23. And instead of it saying, sorry, I don't have that information, it promptly generated a review based on the S22 and people's guesses about what the S23 might contain. And it got it horribly wrong because it was trying to do something that was impossible to do, review a product that hadn't yet come out. It was a test from our side to see what it would do if I asked it. And it highlighted for me from the very beginning, the extent to which AI hallucinates. And I wrote about that extensively, and many other people wrote about it extensively. It was obvious to anyone applying thought to what AI was doing that it makes up facts. Yet, even to this day, I have people bitterly complaining about AI making up facts. And I tell them, that's what it does. It's not a fact model. It's not a fact checker. It's a language model. It's trying to put together one word after the other based on what it thinks should be the next word. It's certainly not looking for facts. So any fact that it produces, you have to double check elsewhere.
Any fact it produces, you need to double check. That is the key. And I actually experimented that yesterday, because my wife and I, we are busy joining a network group and they needed your bio. So my wife says to me, why don't you tell ChatGPT to write my bio and let's see what happens. And oh boy, we had a good laugh. We really had a good laugh of these. It got a lot of things wrong. So and I want to ask, I remember listening to your other interview. You said you use different AI tools, for example, ChatGPT, but you use different ones for different reasons. And I found that quite fascinating. Can you just give the listeners, like, what are some of the AI tools you use and for what specific reasons?
So my favorite one at the moment is called Claude, C-L-A-U-D-E, from Anthropic. And why I particularly like it is because it is more creative. It checks its facts, but again, it does hallucinate as well. And it'll give you links to where it found the information. But when you ask it to tell the same thing in different ways, it comes up with very useful ways of telling things. So we, for example, run a lot of stories on Gadget that use press releases. But we don't run the press releases as such. We take the press release, pump it into ChatGPT or Claude and ask it to rewrite it as a more objective article. And we don't put a byline on that because it's essentially being edited for us by AI. And then it becomes a usable story that's of interest to the readers. And it's not pure PR, which is what it starts out as. So that's one of the ways we use it. But where we use ChatGPT very effectively is when we conduct research and we get the data back and we analyze the data, we produce graphs, and then we write an analysis of those graphs. So with the paid version of ChatGPT, you can actually ask it to produce the graphs for you from a spreadsheet. And you can tell it to analyze the graphs, and you've got to give it a set of instructions on how to analyze it. So what that ultimately will do for us is save a lot of time on pure number crunching, stuff that was human intensive before and will become AI intensive in future. But where it comes into its own is whether we conduct that analysis or whether AI conducts the analysis. We will then add our own strategic insights onto that analysis. That's where the human still comes into the picture in a very big way. Our strategic insights are still far superior to what AI can produce. But we then find ourselves with a massive body of analysis that we have to summarize and pull out the overriding conclusions or insights from that data. So we put that into ChatGPT or Claude, and we ask it to summarize all of this and tell us what are the key findings that have emerged. Once we get that, we in effect have a summary, an executive summary of our research. But the executive summaries that are produced tend to be quite pedestrian still, and don't take account of the dynamics in a particular market or in a particular industry sector that we would be keenly aware of because we constructed the questionnaire or the survey. We'll then work through that and adapt what it's given us into our understanding of the dynamics shaping that market. But what it's done for us is saving a lot of time in pulling together the information and pulling out information that we then use for the next level of our analysis.
Cool.
So there are a lot of moving parts in that process. And the purpose of the AI, or the purpose of our use of the AI for that, is to save us time, not to do the work for us, but to save us time on the, you could call it the heavy lifting. So AI does the heavy lifting for us. And ChatGPT is especially good with that kind of thing. I find it superior to any of the others because it doesn't have live access to the internet unless you're using the paid version. So with the free version of ChatGPT, summarizing a research paper is one of its great strengths.
I've noticed that.
With Claude, where Claude goes further is you ask Claude to write an article based on our research findings, and it'll pull in the key people involved in the research. Like, for example, we are about to release a study with Dell Technologies and Intel on the state of generative AI in South Africa. And we asked the various AI platforms to write an article for us about it based on the analysis we had done. And Claude came up with quotes from ourselves and from the Dell country manager without them being mentioned in any of the material that we gave it. So it went looking for it online. Of course, we couldn't use the quotes because they were so generic, but it was fascinating to see it doing that. And it made me realize that a tool like Claude is going to be a massive shift in how people produce content in the future. But again, I have to stress, you can't use the content it gives you as the final product because it tends to be bland, pedestrian, and often missing the key points. But it's a great way to check whether you're missing anything in what you are writing. So when we write our executive summaries or our conclusions, we then check what the AI has produced in response to our request for it to do that, to see if we've missed out any important elements. And invariably, it will have raised one or two findings that we might have missed in our executive summary or our press releases.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Arthur. I just got 3 rapid questions left, and these are like 3 of my favorites. So since you are such a prolific writer, I want to know, what is a word or phrase that somebody in your industry, that somebody only in your industry will know, and what does that phrase mean?
So there are a few, and they relate to AI. So, for example, there's a phrase or an acronym, RAG.
RAG, RAG, okay.
RAG.
Okay.
Do you know what RAG means in the context of AI?
Nope. Tell me.
Okay. Someone who works in AI would always be talking about RAG. It stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation.
And in plain English?
It essentially allows a company to combine its own data with generative AI language models,
okay,
to enhance accuracy and reliability of that data. And it's essentially corporate generative AI at work, for example. So the large language models, all of them, can respond to a question based on what's out there, but it can't tell you what's in there in terms of what's inside your company. But when you combine it, generative AI, with the information and data within your company, using a commercial AI platform, not the free ones, because the free ones will then take your company information and include it in its language model. But you essentially combine your own information with generative AI, and you have RAG at work, retrieval augmented generation.
Okay, cool. All right, second question. As a writer, right, what phrase or sentence strikes fear? Like, as a writer, if you hear people say this or comment this, you're like, oh no, not again. What sticks out?
At the start of a lot of my talks, I say the S word is banned.
Okay.
And the S word is the word scary.
Okay.
And inevitably, when I talk about all of these things, people say that's scary.
Okay.
And I think it was only scary because you aren't aware of the fact that you already are doing these things. You aren't aware of the fact that AI has already changed your life, but most important, you aren't aware of how much AI is doing for you and how much it's going to do for you. You only think about what it's going to do to you. If you only have the perspective of what it does to you, then it is scary. And sometimes I have to accept that certain audiences are going to find it scary. But if you focus on how much it's going to do for you, there's no ways you're going to find it scary. Do you find your cell phone scary? Some people do, yes, but most people, they use it as a matter of course. It's a daily tool in their hand. But if they apply the same principle, then their cell phone should be scary to them.
That's a good point, Arthur. Love that answer. Last question. Who is the most famous person in your industry? They could be real or fiction.
In AI or in journalism? Or
you pick.
I'd say Alan Turing,
okay,
who came up with the initial definition of computer intelligence in a paper he wrote in 1950. He even has a test named after him to test whether AI has gained human intelligence, called the Turing test.
Wow.
It was described in his original paper as the imitation game, and that was the title of the movie of his life.
Yes.
I was like,
why do I know that? Played by Cumberbatch. What? Yes, I forgot his first name now. It escapes me now. Anyway, okay, cool. So yes, Arthur, correct.
The additional significance of Turing is that he helped to shorten the course of World War II by helping to crack the German naval codes. And as I said, he was a pioneer in AI. He wrote the seminal paper on the topic in 1950, and yet he was treated as a criminal by the British government because he was gay. And he was persecuted and prosecuted to the extent that he was given the option of going to jail or being chemically castrated. He chose the latter, and a few years later committed suicide. And it took the British government something like 50, 60 years to acknowledge the atrocity it had committed. And he was given a pardon by the Queen, no less, at that stage. And the government apologized for what they had done. But obviously, about 60 years too late.
Too late, yeah. Too little, too late. Wow. So Arthur, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating. It's like I literally just listened to an audio book / lecture altogether. So it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I wanted to find out if an audience wants to get hold of you or want to book you for a talk, where is the best place for them to do that?
There's three things they can do. The one is to read my online magazine, Gadget, because all my writing eventually appears there. I do a weekly column and features for the Sunday Times in Business Times, and all of those stories are used in some form on Gadget as well. So that's the first port of call. The second is on social media. My social media handle is Art, A-R-T, the number 2, and then G-E-E, Art2G. on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. So they can follow me on any of those threads as well. But if they want to contact me directly, then my email address is very simple, Arthur, A-R-T-H-U-R, at worldwideworks, and works with an X.com. Arthur at worldwideworks.com. Always the best way to contact me.
Awesome. Arthur, thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Charles.